My name is Leslie Hansen. I am a parent consultant at the Utah Parent Center. I am also the mother of our 13-year-old boy with developmental disabilities. And at the Utah Parent Center, we are parents helping parents. So each of us is a parent of a child in special education. We understand from the parent perspective what it is like working with our special education teams. We do one-on-one consultations, and we also present workshops like the one you're seeing here tonight. We have guest presenters as well as presentations on the basics of IEPs and so many other topics. We all are able to help with questions that you may have even after this presentation. We do one-on-one consultations, and we are a statewide nonprofit organization helping families navigate special education. So tonight, I would like to introduce Donnell Pons. She will be our guest presenter this evening. We are so excited to have her here. This is such a wonderful topic with lots of questions. So I want to introduce Donnell. She has a husband and several children with dyslexia. When Ms. Pons discovered her son had dyslexia and was struggling to find appropriate services, she went back to school and received a dual MED and MAT in teaching and learning from Westminster College with a special education certificate, none of which addressed dyslexia, unfortunately. So Ms. Pons has taught secondary language arts and worked at a charter school focusing on supporting students on the autism spectrum. She currently works with adults in a workplace literacy program. Ms. Pons is trained in multiple structured literacy-based reading methods. She was the literacy and reading coordinator and the ELL director at AISU, a public charter school in Murray, Utah. Her efforts to implement a multi-structured comprehensive literacy program at AISU were featured in the Language magazine, October 2016, and Middle Web Smart Brief. Ms. Pons has produced a nationally recognized 3-part webcast series for Reading Horizons on teaching, reading, and recognizing dyslexia. She is the member of Decoding Dyslexia Utah and help compose the Utah State Dyslexia Handbook. So without further ado, I introduce Donnell Pons. Thank you, Donnell.
Thank you so much. And we met a few years ago, and we had a lot of synergy over our experiences together. So I know that you get it, you understand, and this is just a real opportunity for me. So I appreciate being able to speak to individuals today about dyslexia. So important. And then, as was pointed out, I came to this not just as an educator, that was a little bit later in life, but really as a wife and a mother of people who have dyslexia, and realizing that there was very little help. And thankfully, over the course of the years, my son who has dyslexia, my youngest with dyslexia, a solid case of the 3Ds, we'll talk about later, there wasn't much available. But over the course of the 10 to 15 years, we've had an explosion of information. And now I think one of the problems that we have is there's so much information. What should I take in? Where do I go? What are the best resources? So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. But just quickly to introduce, when I discovered dyslexia and what it was my husband. We have been married and we were on our honeymoon. Nothing had ever been said about reading. It's not usually one of those things you talk about a lot, I guess. And we were staying in a tent at the base of the Tetons on our honeymoon. And I had picked up a book earlier in the day. I loved reading. He knew that about me. I was a reporter at the Salt Lake Tribune at the time. And I picked up the book in the tent, started reading, handed it over to him. And he started this very labored attempt at trying to read the text. And I was floored. I knew that he was on the dean's list at the University of Utah. I thought, how is that possible? To be in college struggling that hard with reading? Come to find out it was very difficult. He was spending up to 6 hours a night trying to get the homework done for just a class. I was floored. It led into more discussion about, oh, well, I'm a pretty good reader compared to the rest of the people in my family. So there were other folks in his household struggling with dyslexia, parents namely. So for them, they didn't know what to do. And this becomes a very familiar story. There might even be pieces of it that sound very familiar to people just hearing that little bit about it. The long story short is, after having a very uncomfortable conversation and realizing, gosh, what can I do to help? It wasn't that easy. And you literally had to go to the library then to check out books. And there wasn't a whole lot of information. Thankfully, over the years, we've seen an explosion, as I said, of information that's become available, but there's almost so much information, it's overload. What are the pieces that are the most pertinent for me to know? And tonight we'll kind of try to sort through some of that. But just know I've been on this journey for a long time, and at all stages and phases, from public school to now going on to college, and what can be done to help our students and other individuals around us. The first slide that I'm going to, let's see if we can get it to respond here. And then if it doesn't jump 6 slides, which I think it did, that's my favorite. So we'll start with this one here. Dyslexia in the 21st century. What do we know? As I said, we've had an explosion of information, and this comes directly from Dr. Sally Shaywitz. If you haven't heard her name, you're going to be familiar with it. She runs the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. She's also one of the foremost authorities on dyslexia. In 2010, she wrote a book that was kind of a game changer, exploded information, had a lot of research in it, was called Overcoming Dyslexia. She now has a second edition in 2020. It's well worth getting. And I mentioned that at the end of the presentation. I have all of my resources and books there for you. But dyslexia in the 21st century. In dyslexia, we have the scientific knowledge, period. So if anybody tells you, oh, it's too hard to tell, we don't know, no. Definitively, we have the scientific knowledge. In dyslexia, the major problem is not a knowledge gap. We've got the knowledge. It's an action gap. Most definitely, it is an action gap. We've got the knowledge. What are we doing to distribute the knowledge, get people trained so that people are benefiting from the knowledge? That's the problem. To move forward, we must align education with 21st century science. And we can, but it's got to be done. There's no other way forward. So again, let's remember, if the takeaway is, what do we know about dyslexia? Plenty. There's loads of scientific knowledge. So there's no knowledge gap. It's an action gap. It's getting the knowledge into the hands of individuals who need it in order to benefit the lives of those who are waiting for that to happen. And it shouldn't be happening anymore. So dyslexia, let's talk a little bit about what those pieces of information are that we know. There's clinical evidence, and the clinical evidence is the history. There's total clinical evidence. It was first described over a century ago in 1896. Okay, I know this is just going to leave many of us floored. 1896, we have excellent descriptions of what dyslexia is. It's called a word blindness to some folks. And the descriptions of the very first description of the individual that was named by name in some research paper, actually, there's some that predates in Germany of some folks that were talking about what was dyslexia, but it was all clinical talk. And this individual Pringle in England that actually used a person to talk about it. It was Percy F., this young student, and that's when he kind of humanized dyslexia and talks about this otherwise really bright student who can't seem to pick up reading despite instruction. And that's our basic definition. We still go off today, 1896. So then the third thing, children's clinical picture is the same as we see in 2021 in children with dyslexia. So has not changed. What we saw, we see today. The scientific evidence, we have data. So we have a history, and we also have scientific evidence, which is the data. We have a 21st century definition that comes off of that history and data. It was unexpected in 1896. It's unexpected in 2010, and it's unexpected in our federal law in 2018. You're going to find that term the same throughout. An unexpected challenge with reading, despite being really intelligent. And that's another key takeaway, is to remember that our students are very bright. So I'm sorry that my computer's lagging here. I'm trying to get it to move forward. Here we go. But again, I hope it's not jumping too fast. So our snapshot of learning and attention issues in the United States. This one here, I just checked the data. I think I'm trying to find the data on it. But anyway, I went to look to see an updated one, and the statistics are basically the same. They don't move much. So I thought we'll just keep it. So 1 in 5 children in the US have learning and attention issues, 1 in 5. So they're in every classroom. And depending on the size of the classroom, or depending on familiar, if there's families living together that may have characteristics of, you're going to find more. So there'll be pockets where there are more. Only a small subset of those students, 1 in 5, are ever going to receive any specialized instruction or accommodation. That's a very small subset. So we see that broken out into 2 of these subsets of the 1 in 5. My husband never received services. He wouldn't show up here at all. I have a daughter, wouldn't have received services either, didn't get picked up. I have 1 out of my 3 that got picked up. So it's interesting. 1 in 16 public school students have individualized education programs. So they have an IEP. They got picked up on IEP, 1 in 16. That's not a lot of kids. 1 in 50 in the public school education system is going to have a 504, end up with some accommodations on a 504. So you can see how that breaks out of the 1 in 5. while millions of children with learning and attention issues are never formally identified or receive any kind of services. That's the typical story. As I said, that's been us, the typical story. The risk factors under here, we're talking tonight about dyslexia, we're talking a lot of genetics that are going to be present in our discussion about dyslexia. And then I want to see over on the side here, it talks about common examples of these learning disabilities they're talking about. And what's the number one? Dyslexia. It's number one. It's always number one on the list. And then they have other difficulties that may follow. And so we really do need to be doing a better job of understanding and finding and helping students who have dyslexia. So how widespread is dyslexia? Again, I looked at this. This is from the International Dyslexia Association to see if I need an update. It's pretty much the same. So of the school population, we have a pie chart. About 13 to 15 or 14% of the school population nationwide are identified as having a handicapping condition that qualifies for special education services. Right out of those 13 categories, usually we're looking at SLD, LD for students with dyslexia. About 13 to 14% of the school population nationwide are identified. So that's out of that pie chart. Now look at the next one down. 1/2 of all students who are identified. So take those 13 to 14%, move them down to the next pie chart. Half of all students who are identified for special education are classified as having an LD, which if you've attended any conferences and heard people who talk about the Woodcock-Johnson, LD was just another term for dyslexia. About 85% of those students have a primary learning disability in reading and language processing. It's the majority of our kids.
Donnell, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, really quick. Will this PowerPoint be available?
Yes, you bet.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Okay.
And then population as a whole, let's take a look at that. Up to 15 to 20% of the population as a whole may have symptoms of dyslexia, including slower and inaccurate reading, weak spelling, and poor writing. Not all will qualify for special education. You know, a lot of them don't, but most benefit from systematic, they all benefit from systematic explicit instruction in reading, writing, and language. So again, it's our number one category. It's our largest group. It's the number one reason a student's going to be struggling. So we ought to be prepared to be able to recognize it and to help. What percentage of people attribute the LD to inaccurate causes? This one's very interesting too. That nearly 1/3 of people attributed LD learning differences to causes that were inaccurate. Nearly 1/3 of people, was done by the National Center for Learning Difficulties or Differences. And they did a quick study and reached out and did some research. And nearly 1/3 of the people that they researched or sampled didn't know what caused LD. 22% of them believe that LD is caused by too much television. Has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing to do with learning disabilities. 31% thought it was the diet, poor diet, nothing to do with dyslexia. 24% believe that LD is caused by childhood vaccination, nothing to do with dyslexia. But I think that's really interesting, just not even understanding what causes dyslexia. And 1.22 million students repeated a grade in 2014 to 2015. It's a lot of students who had to repeat a grade in 2014, 2015. Now look at this next number. 76% of them were general education students who had not been identified as having any learning disability. 76% of the students repeating a grade had never been identified for any learning disability. It's outrageous that nobody's looking to see why are they struggling. So we know this is something that's not going to be new to anyone. This is a 2011 article. It's just stating the obvious. 3rd grade reading predicts later high school graduation. This is hard and fast. It's been run through many different research projects and tests, and it comes out strong and hard. 3rd grade reading predicts later high school graduation. There's a lot of reasons why that is. One primary factor is in the United States, we pretty much teach reading grades K through 3. We've all heard the phrases, we're learning to read K through 3, and now you're reading to learn 4th grade and above. Unfortunately, a lot of students in K through 3 are not picking up reading. They're not becoming proficient readers. And then that 4th and above, they're just struggling on their own because no one really is prepared to help them. And so we'll take a look at that. And then of course, all the statistics that are attached to the fact that if I'm not reading well by the time I hit 3rd grade and move beyond, what's my outlook? Well, not only is high school graduation probably not in the cards, because you're going to be 4 times less likely to graduate by age 19 than a child who does read proficiently by that time. But you're going to add poverty to the mix, and a student is 13 times less likely to graduate on time than his or her proficient, wealthier peer. Reading is a huge skill needed for everything else. So let's take a look at these National Association of Educational Progress tests that we do on reading.
So you worked so hard on your reading last year. And that's why you're
We've got
so-
somebody who should mute. See if we can get somebody to mute there. Great. So this National Association of Educational Progress test, the NAEP. Let's take a look at this pie chart. Let's understand the top one here. This is reading. And we're going to look at what the reading scores said. How many students were proficient or above? And we see here, and we do it in 4th, 8th, and then I think they're due sometimes even a 12th, but these are 4th. So by the end of 4th grade, we've got this many students that are proficient or above in reading, 35%. That's the minority. Dr. Louisa Moats always leans into the one. She's a great reading researcher who leans into this all the time and talks about it. So you only got 35% of your students that are feeling at least confident or comfortable. 65%, the majority of students, are below proficient. And she said, we all ought to be screaming about this. No one should forget it. We should all be up at night. That's not okay. Do all of those students who are struggling have dyslexia? No. So what that tells us is that we have a lot of students who could benefit from really good reading instruction that don't have dyslexia. Apparently the instruction they're receiving hasn't been sufficient for them, and they could benefit. The good thing about the instruction for students who have dyslexia is research has shown it benefits more than just students who have dyslexia. It's really a better way to teach everyone. We'll talk about that later too. So that's the top pie chart. Underneath, let's take a look at what this one means. This is the percent who learn to read with little or no explicit instruction. So the second one deals with instruction. 40% of students, this is a study they did, learn to read with little or no explicit instruction, meaning the instruction was okay, it wasn't great. Whether that was intentional or not, it happened. And about 40% of the students were okay. They did okay with that. But look again at the majority, 60% needed moderate to extensive explicit instruction. 60%, the majority, needed it to be taught more explicitly with better instruction. So again, this isn't just a dyslexia issue with instruction needing to be better. It is a majority of students would be better readers if they receive better instruction. So again, and I'm going to thank our folks who have dyslexia, not only do we have some of the most abundant and in-depth research on reading due to folks who have dyslexia. Thank you very much for providing that foundation. You folks who have dyslexia have provided that information for everybody else. So we all benefit as a result. I call them the canaries in the cave. Thank you for helping. So about 1/3 of students at grades 4th and 8th reported. This is a very interesting thing to think about. This is NAEP as well. There's a question on NAEP that they've added. This one is just self-identification. The students don't have to prove anything. They just self-identify and say yes or no to this. It's their opinion of themselves. About 1/3 of students at grades 4th and 8th self-reported that they definitely can, meaning they felt very strongly that they could explain the meaning of something they had read. Okay, I want us to think about this for a minute, because it was a reading researcher who pulled this one, said, I just want us to think about this for a minute. You're self-identifying. No one's going to tell. You could say whatever. And just 1/3 of the students said, yeah, I think I could definitely tell you what I've just read, explain what I've just read. That's not okay. That is not okay, because you could have said anything and no one would have known. They're not feeling comfortable or confident with their reading. So this is that case that I was talking about, that first published humanized case of developmental dyslexia by Dr. Pringle Morgan, referring to this young individual, 14 years old, Percy F. And there's this quote, it's very famous, from the British Medical Journal. But I want you to pay attention to the definition of what this guy is saying, because it comes up later. He's talking about the student. He's always been bright, an intelligent boy. That's our number one thing we look for. Otherwise bright student, otherwise handles stuff just fine. Quick at games, not inferior in any other way to students his age. His great difficulty has been and is now his inability to learn to read. That's it. Well, why is this so hard? And the schoolmaster who's taught him for some years says that he would be the smartest kid in the school if the instruction were entirely oral. So having a great conversation, we go to read, things are very hard and very different. That's our standard definition we use today too, within the literature. So here's Dr. Sally Shaywitz, fast forward. This is just, one of the many times Dr. Shaywitz has testified in front of a committee or a hearing on the science of dyslexia. But again, she restates what was stated at the beginning of the PowerPoint. As you will hear in dyslexia, science has moved forward at a rapid pace so that we now can reliably define dyslexia. We know its cognitive basis, where it resides in the brain, what's happening when students read, its symptoms. And we have evidence-based interventions, which can turn the sad, struggling child into not only a good reader, but one who has self-esteem and feels fulfilled in the classroom. We can do it. We have an action gap, not an information gap. She's just repeating that here. So again, I've mentioned this at the back, so you'll be sure if you haven't read the book or looked at it, if you have anyone who has dyslexia in your household, this is my number one go-to book if I purchased one. There's an updated, make sure you get the second edition, she's added to it. Also in here is some very interesting information on one of the longest studies that anyone has done on folks who have dyslexia. I want to say we're moving into 20 years of information that Dr. Shaywitz has collected on the same individuals with dyslexia. It's very interesting, great stuff. So let's look at our definition here. So it's an unexpected difficulty in reading in children and adults who otherwise possess the intelligence and motivation considered necessary for accurate and fluent reading, and who also have had reasonable reading instruction. That's the definition of developmental dyslexia right there. So if you think of anyone that fits, that's the definition, and we use it all the time. Now, folks sometimes want a lengthier definition. So dyslexia is a language-based learning disability. This is from the IDA. Dyslexia refers to a cluster of symptoms, and I'm going to show you some of those clusters of symptoms that you will see. That's what we're looking for, a constellation or cluster of things that come together, which result in people having difficulties with specific language skills, particularly reading. Students with dyslexia usually experience difficulties with other language skills, such as spelling, writing, and pronouncing words. Pay attention to that, pronouncing words. It's very important. That relates to the PA, the phonemic awareness, the ability to hear and manipulate spoken words, sounds. Dyslexia affects individuals throughout their lives. You don't grow out of it. You don't get older and grow out of it. You don't receive great reading instruction and not have dyslexia. That's another important thing to remember. Reading is one aspect. Its impact can change at different stages in a person's life. So let's remember that while I'm in school and I'm being asked to read and write so very much, to learn and then to produce, it's going to be very difficult for me in my life. It is referred to as a learning disability because dyslexia can make it very difficult for a student to succeed academically in the typical instructional environment. That's why we're calling it a learning disability. And in its more severe forms, will qualify a student for special ed, special accommodations, or extra support services. So that's the lengthy IDA definition. And that definition is fantastic. It gives a great explanation. Currently, right now in legislation, what does it look like for me in my state if I have someone who has dyslexia? Only 4 states have no dyslexia related laws. So this is another thing that's a misnomer. Well, there's nothing we can do about it. No, we're doing a lot about dyslexia, and every state except 4 have legislation regarding dyslexia. It's named specifically. So I've listed those 4 states that don't have anything yet. Let's hope they get some. It's important that to mention dyslexia specifically by name. We don't want to call it anything but what it is, as dyslexia, because it's not simply a reading disability. It's more than that and can be more than that. Dyslexia has a long scientific, clinical, and educational history, and the better a student's educational needs are recognized, the more likely a student will have a well-suited educational program. I can't emphasize that enough. We do a real disservice to our students when we just put a blanket title of reading difficulties, struggling with reading. We really need to know to get in, do some testing and make sure it's dyslexia, and then understand its implications and the subtests that we do in observations, family history, various things that will give us information so that student does get the best accommodation and support and instruction. 17 states have dyslexia handbooks. We have one. Utah's got a handbook, and I won't have time to go into all of it, but you should be aware of it as a parent and make sure your teachers are aware of it and your administration is aware of it at your school. Dyslexia related legislation in Utah, there's just some bills there that are listed if you're interested. In 2015, we had a House Bill 117, a pilot program for professional development literacy interventions, K-5, that's still ongoing. 2020, House Bill 114, early learning training and assessment standards. So you might have been hearing about teachers getting letters training. That's a Dr. Louisa Moat's program. That's fantastic training. And we're working towards having every teacher trained first in those lower grades, moving up the grades. Because again, it's not over by K-3. Students still need reading support. And if anybody was listening to the Wasatch Reading Summit on Friday, Dr. Julie Washington, fantastic researcher in reading, who talked about the fact that that cutoff age of 3rd grade is utterly ridiculous, and there's no research to support it. So teachers should be prepared with training and background to help support reading instruction beyond 3rd grade. Colorado is open to public school for students with dyslexia, which is fantastic. I have not been up to visit because COVID, we had the COVID outbreak when they opened and I wasn't able to go visit the school as we have restrictions. But that is absolutely fantastic. It is a district school for kids with dyslexia. So it's not a private, not a charter, it's within the district. It's a great step forward. We're going to talk a little bit right here about child find because it gets into how do I recognize dyslexia, and they kind of nicely gel. So something that we're just going to get over it right now. And I pulled some slides from a state presentation that I did with the Utah State Board of Education to make sure that people understand that we have a thing called child find across the country. And every student in the schools, your child find is a mandate for educators, for parents, for anyone working with individuals who are in the school system, young people learning. It's called child find, and it's a mandate. And we're mandated, it's a legal requirement included in the Individual Students with Disabilities Act, IDEA, and Section 504, that schools identify, locate, and evaluate all children who have disabilities and who may be entitled to special education or 504 services. Take a screenshot. I'm going to share the PowerPoint. If you need this, pull the slide up. This is the law. It's a legal requirement included. So, and this has been stated many, many places, that we identify, locate, and evaluate. So if your student is struggling and you reach out for help, yes, it's a legal requirement to provide that help. And so we start working on how do we help. So let's look at Section 504 first. This has become very popular, 504s. They didn't used to be nearly as popular as they are now, and they can be a really good resource. So Section 504 is a federal civil rights law under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. In 2009, the ADA Amendments Act became law and broadened the interpretation of Section 504. Students with disabilities in school settings fall under the civil rights protection of Section 504. And the law and regulations prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability in all school programs and activities in public schools receiving direct or indirect federal funding. So this is federal. It is designed to provide equal access and fairness in general education to students with disabilities through their 504 accommodation plan. So this is 504, it's not an IEP, they're different, they're two different things. Section 504 is accommodations, it's not instruction. It's just providing appropriate accommodations for the student to be able to access the curriculum and to be able to get through their school day. What are the eligibility requirements for a 504? They're less restrictive and intense than an IEP. That's why their 504s are pretty popular. A student is eligible for a Section 504 accommodation plan if an evaluation shows, and the evaluation is the part that's very open to interpretation, shows that the student has a mental or physical impairment that substantially, and this is the important part, substantially limits one or more major life activities or major bodily functions and impacts the student's education. Dyslexia does, so it fits this. And that evaluation piece can be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be a formal evaluation. As often the medical doctor that wrote it down that saw characteristics of. It's a history of struggling, and you've got all the paperwork to show that, past papers, spelling tests all failed, these sorts of things. The common major life activities are affected by dyslexia. So what's the major life activity that's affected by dyslexia? What we're talking about here is being able to concentrate in the classroom, reading, it's mentioned right there specifically, writing specifically. So it is under that major life activities and fits. And then we've pulled it out here for you to just see dyslexia may impact the speaking, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, working, and interacting with others. In the classroom, the life activities may look like challenges with academic work in those areas. However, now pay attention to this, students with dyslexia may also struggle with obtaining a driver's license. So as your student gets older, think ahead. Sometimes with dyslexia, we have directionality challenges, left, right, up, down, push, pull, and also holding information and working with it. That's the processing piece. Pay attention, again, this is why understanding the student and not just slapping, oh, it's a reading difficulty on the student, because later other things that are very important to life may be difficult. Obtaining a driver's license could be one of those. A lot of information is given to you quickly to the individual with dyslexia. If they're in the driver's seat and they have directionality issues, go left, go right, that may be very difficult. So again, understanding and having accommodations for that then will go with the individual to getting the driver's license. Participating in organized sport. You can't just yell from the coach directions at me. I may need it given to me a different way. reading a menu in a restaurant, filling out a job application, navigating a job. Those are things that major life activities that could be impacted by dyslexia. And if you don't know it's dyslexia and you have an understanding of that particular student's needs, you're going to miss these other life activities that should be addressed along the way to help the student be successful and to feel supported. So the referral process, let's take a look at that. A referral for evaluation is received verbally or in writing. This is for the 504, remember, so it's looser than the IEP. A school should obtain written parent guardian consent to conduct the evaluation. A knowledgeable group of people determine if the student has a disability, and if so, what services the student needs. So again, if you have pieces of information that indicate the struggle, but you don't have the formal evaluation, those can be very important when this knowledgeable group comes together. Upon review, if the school district refuses to provide Section 504 accommodations, the school district must provide the parent with notice under that Section 4 procedural rights. And then school districts violate Section 504 when they deny or delay conducting a formal evaluation of a student. This is directly from the USBE, when it would have been reasonable for a staff member to have suspected that a student has a disability. So again, if you've got a student who crops up later grades, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and they're reading grade levels below, and this student doesn't have an IEP, has no 504, that directly qualifies as the last bullet point. It's not okay. So that would have been reasonable for someone to have noticed. And that's what they're talking about right there, that student is struggling. So again, this is our responsibility. The Utah Dyslexia Handbook also states, and this was from October 4th, 2018, in the Utah Dyslexia Handbook, it is the responsibility of local education agencies, or LEAs, to implement effective universal screening processes to find the students and use the information they collect to make important determinations about dyslexia-specific accommodations and interventions, provide what the students need. Multiple sources of data are required to identify both individual student strengths and areas of need. The data will provide LEAs with accurate information. So again, data collection, we need to do it to understand the specific needs of the students and provide appropriate instruction and accommodations. So there's just a quick slide that will be included that shows you the evaluation process and lays it out, along with the timeline that you have. So let's talk about assessing the children with dyslexia. What are those patterns of deficits? Let's talk about what it is and what it is not. There's a few slides. So it's a difficulty with letter sound knowledge and phonological awareness, the inability to identify letters and their sounds, and to manipulate the individual units of speech, such as the initial, middle, or ending sounds in a word. That's critical to reading. It also happens to be a large deficit for individuals with dyslexia. And this is one of our #1 screenings, is phonemic awareness. That's what we're talking about here. And then the alphabetic code. Once I have the sounds down, can I put it to the symbol, which is the letter? So phoneme, sound, grapheme, symbol. And how well can I hear those phonemes without looking at anything and manipulate them, understand them, hear them? That's why paying attention to the speech is so important. Is that student really getting all the syllables in a 3-syllable or 2-syllable word, or are they missing some consistently? That can be a tip-off, and you hear that early and young. Not necessarily a speech impediment, but they're missing those sounds within multisyllabic words. And so that's the first piece. Second, difficulty with rapid automatized naming. That's RAN for short. It's the inability to rapidly recall and name familiar items such as letters, numbers, and colors. This is RAN. The first one's phonemic awareness, PA. The second one is rapid automatized naming, or RAN. How quickly and automatically can I recall things that I already know? And that's just a set number. Now, I'm going to pause right here because #1, the first bullet point, PA, phonemic awareness, we can get a lot of bang for our buck with activities for PA. And in my workplace literacy program, working with adults who were never identified as having dyslexia, but who are still struggling with reading and want help, this typically is a big issue. It was never addressed. They're struggling with the sounds. Nobody ever realized they didn't really hear some of those 3-syllable words. They've been mispronouncing, nobody noticed. And we can do a lot with that. There's a lot of bang for the buck. The second one, RAN, much more difficult. There's a lot of research still ongoing. That's that science of reading that we hear kicking around. What's the science of reading? The ongoing science of reading. There's a lot of research being conducted. This is a big piece. There's a lot that goes into it. That's one of the difficulties. But we hope to have some really good information on RAN in the future. The third one, there's difficulty with processing speed and working memory. The inability to focus attention to complete tasks and hold new information in short-term memory. and manipulate it to achieve a result. So these are the three major points that we're looking for. Pattern of deficits, these three major: difficulty with that processing speed and working memory, the inability to focus attention to complete a task and hold that new information in short-term memory and manipulate it to achieve a result. That's a big piece, a big component of learning to read, is being able to do that. Now, mind you, you probably notice that a lot of these are related to each other. Once I help with the phonemic awareness and they're able to identify and manipulate those sounds, and they get up to advanced phonemic awareness and they do it automatically, that's how we get there. That will relieve or alleviate some of the cognitive load that we're carrying. So you can see once we get in, we start to identify and can help with pieces of this, it starts to alleviate some of the challenges in some of the other areas and how it helps with the student overall. Let's look at possible characteristics and behavior of older students and adults with dyslexia, because as we know, many go unidentified, right? And so let's go down this tick list. And again, we're looking for a pattern, a constellation, a couple of these things, more of these things. If you got the phonemic awareness, rapid automatized naming going on, and then we look at this list. So a student may have been diagnosed LD or SLD in school. I'm just going to give them that. We have a lot of adults walking around who said, oh yeah, well, back when I was a kid, they said I had LD. Is that dyslexia? Yeah. So then when I sit down, we do some, diving and looking in. Yeah, it was dyslexia. It is dyslexia. You should be able to name that and say it. Trouble spelling his or her name with middle and last name. So I see this a lot in middle and high school students, 4th, 5th, 6th. You should have this down, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. This should not be difficult. But if a student has dyslexia, and particularly, it's mild, moderate to severe, it can be on a spectrum, right? We're looking more beyond the mild here, right? Trouble spelling his or her own name, particularly a middle and a last name that may be difficult or complicated. Or you're seeing it spelled with upper and lowercase letters in it too, because they're just not sure about the grapheme representation either. That's a tip off. And I have plenty of students who can do their first and last name, but I found a lot of students in high school that I was working with. How about that middle name? Oh, I couldn't write that. That's not okay. That's dyslexia. That's what we're talking about here. Confusion writing his or her own birth date. So I'm converting the month, day, and year into numbers. It's going in a certain order, and I've got to remember that stream of numbers. And that's a challenge if I'm having to review that. Dyslexia. May struggle to recall home address with correct spelling. And think about it. I had plenty of middle and high school students that when I said, okay, could you write your address for me? And they would write an address and struggle writing it. And I would say, so this is where you're living right now? Oh, well, no, we lived there 5 years ago. So again, do a little digging, because if they can't produce their current address, because maybe it was drilled when they were young, when they moved, and that would be my son. My son would have qualified for that because we drilled and then we moved quite a bit. And it was tough to hang on to those. And remember, it's a combination of numbers and letters to be able to write your address. May not remember a common phone number. So you got to have one emergency phone number. You got to be able to remember one, and that can be really challenging. I remember having a principal get on me because your son doesn't have a phone number, and we had drilled and drilled and drilled. So my son was hitting all of these, right? So that constellation or pattern. Leaves out months of the year. That's not typical. You should have that down. You've had good, adequate instruction. This is a bright student. They should have that down. So we make up a lot of excuses for this. And a student's struggling. A student is struggling and we need to help. Leaves out months of the year. That's not something you do if you don't have dyslexia. You're doing all these things. Struggles to name the days of the week in order and can't spell them correctly. Or they're able to get Wednesday because they've erased and put in, and they struggle and write. That again, 4th, 5th, 6th, no, we should have this down. If we were taught correctly, we understood, we didn't have any challenges or issues. No. Avoids any writing assignments, and it's no matter how small. I don't care that you've now just asked for a paragraph. I'm still going to just die having to give that to you. Won't read inside or outside of class. Now, here's the other thing. Folks with dyslexia read, because I get told all the time, well, they don't have dyslexia, they read. Yes, folks with dyslexia read. It's not very good reading. It's difficult and challenging. They're not getting a whole lot out of it, and they don't enjoy it. They're hiding. A lot of them may hide the fact they don't enjoy it. Many of them are just stating, I don't like reading. The reading is choppy and error prone. So pay attention to that reading and what it looks like, sounds like. I had many teachers sometimes tell me, I think my student has dyslexia in these upper grades. And I would say, what do they sound like when they're reading? And they would say, oh, I don't know. It's the first thing we do. And it's quietly to the side. Let's have a read. Let's see what that looks and feels like. What am I hearing? Because you can hear, they tell you a lot. They're anxious in the classroom or considered quiet. So now we're getting into some behavioral things you see come out as a result of the fact that stealth dyslexia, I'm hiding in plain sight. I'm sitting right in your classroom. I have dyslexia. No one's ever said a word about it. I'm anxious in the classroom, or I can be considered quiet. And the last one, I may compensate by being overly adventurous, or the class clown, sarcastic, lots of sarcasm. First one to make the joke. Look for these things. Again, it's a pattern. You know, am I seeing more than one? Do I have a few of these things together? What are they telling me about the student? And pretty soon you start to see a profile. And then when you get really good at identifying and understanding and going through the process, you get very, very good. Of course, at some point we'll talk about having a diagnosis that has to be done by somebody else. Outside of the school system, we have trained psychologists, neuropsychologists that can give a dyslexia diagnosis in the state. But within the school, remember that there's special education that will do its testing and have a category where you qualify for special education services. But if you want a diagnosis that's going outside of the school system, there are some school psychologists, I understand, that have some training in giving a diagnosis of dyslexia. That's great. And so if that's the case, terrific. But again, that's regulated by licensing in the state of Utah. One thing I found interesting, many of the conferences I attended, there's a really great psychologist, Steve Dykstra, in the field of reading, talks about dyslexia a lot. He's fantastic. And one thing he said at a conference is, I'm going to spend hours running all the tests to confirm to everybody the student has dyslexia and give the diagnosis, where a teacher is going to spot it within minutes if they're really good and they know what they're doing, because you're doing all the things that are hard for someone who has dyslexia. It's interesting. And he's got to kind of make those happen in his setting, clinical setting. Let's see if we can get this. Yep, it's awake. Okay. So I'm going to move to this next slide. Dyslexia does coexist with other conditions, because that's another question too. A lot of this may sound to you like ADHD, right? Inattentive, can't really pay attention, maybe skipping around when they're reading. But again, remember, we're looking for a lot of things to be coming together. And does dyslexia and ADHD co-attend? Yes, they do. It has a rather high number. We can have both. So that's a brain-based condition as well that impacts attention and focus. It coexists with dyslexia about 30% of the time. I got this from IDA. You're going to see a roving statistic on this one when it co-attends. I've had researchers at some conferences do their own research and say, that's 50% for me. Dr. Sally Shaywitz said, hey, in my research, it's been 60, so it's a moving target. But at any rate, does it co-occur? Yes, and it's pretty high with dyslexia. So again, another case for really understanding that student and their specific struggles. Dysgraphia, this can co-occur quite often with dyslexia. This is a brain-based condition as well that impacts written expression, and it co-occurs with dyslexia, or it can stand alone. Dysgraphia can occur as part of ADD and ADHD as well. So that's another one to kind of pull apart and understand the writing difficulty. And make sure that you have a good firm understanding and you spend enough time with the student that it is dysgraphia and not just hiding poor spelling. Because I've had some students that wrote very poorly because they were hiding the ability that they just couldn't spell. And it's to be able to pull that out and understand it. And then dyscalculia or dyscalculia, however you want to say it. This is the brain-based condition that impacts numbers and math concepts. It can co-occur with dyslexia. So I'm talking about the 3 Ds: dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I have a student with those and you see it quite often. So those are the 3 Ds. The math piece is brain-based condition, as I said, and it's roughly 43 to 65% of students with LBLD have dyscalculia or dyscalculia. That's a high number. And that is one that I see not a whole lot of work being done to help students who have the math difficulty. And I would love to see more information. I'd like to be seeing people talking about this more, how it can co-occur and how it can help our students, and not just talk about the reading piece, but they're really struggling with math too, and what we can do to help there with the basic numeracy to support that learning. And then executive functioning, which we know is huge and can be big for many students in different ways, but it's a pattern of chronic difficulties in executing daily tasks and planning, organizing, memory, and reasoning. You can see how that could easily relate to dyslexia and what's going on there. So just kind of quickly running over some of those coexisting, but the top is what I wanted to really talk about, those top that we see quite a bit, and understanding. So again, another case to really understand your student, not just call it a reading difficulty and call it good. So let's see if this will move to the next slide. Sorry guys, I've got apparently an ancient computer that doesn't like to be woken up. So what are the most common accommodations for folks who have dyslexia? Let's talk about them. And then we'll talk about instruction too. That's a very important piece. And I have quite a few slides on that. So the most common accommodations for dyslexia are extended time, reduced writing, no spelling, grammar, or punctuation that gets marked down. Oops. And test questions read aloud, verbal responses. So those are some of the most common. I'm going to just talk really quickly about the most common being extended time. Make sure your student has the skills to be able to do whatever work is in front of him or her with the extended time. That's all I'm going to say. And you can figure the rest out. What I see a lot is a student struggling with reading who's reading 3-4 grade levels below. They're given a text at grade level and extended time. That's not okay. That's an inappropriate accommodation. So if I have reading 3-4 grade levels below and I get extended time, then I should also be giving verbal responses after having the information received or verbally and auditorially, right? So that I can hear it and then I give responses verbally. That's appropriate. Not just sitting there struggling with now grade level text and I don't have the skills to be able to do that. So again, let's think about these. Reduced writing, that's fantastic, but do I have the skills and ability to write what's being asked of me? Because even if a sentence is hard and I'm being asked to do a paragraph, that's not appropriate either. So what are we going to do to help me there? That's where verbal response comes back in, or speech to text that has been taught and has been supported. Test questions read aloud, that's self-explanatory, goes with extended time. So that's why I list those together, because we really need to understand the student and the student's profile to know what's appropriate and when they need to co-attend with each other. Okay, very important. And then the next slide here, we can get this to move for us. Spelling and writing accommodations specifically. So the younger grades, sound walls instead of word walls. I'm learning things by sound. That should be standard across the board. We're thankfully hearing a lot more talking about sound walls. It's speech to print is the best way to teach. We've been teaching print to speech. That's one of the issues that we have with all the reading science, is that's the incorrect way of teaching. So we should be leaning into the sounds, and there should be sound walls, not word walls. Then I should also be hearing and seeing things in my classroom for words by syllable type, being taught the basic syllable types and being able to use that to help me not only to decode and take things apart, but also to be able to encode, to write, to spell. Etymology, using the etymology foundations of the word and the morphology to be able to take words apart and have meaning and understanding. I should have access to things like Grammarly to help me with my grammar. I should have access to No More Red Ink, which has many free programs, which provides feedback to me about my writing without having somebody bleed all over it so that I don't lose my confidence. Google Documents does a speech to text. I should have access to that speech to text to be able to keep up with my peers. So again, we're always working on skills, but if I don't have the skills to go into my classroom today and feel like I can do the work, then I need some supports, and we have them. So I need to have them while I'm also having remediation, because it doesn't do me any good to sit in class struggling to practice my writing when I can't be with my peers doing the same work. So those two things that's a disconnect in understanding the student and their needs. So technology, more technology. We have Google Documents and slides using built-in speech to text. So the student could provide slides of something if they wanted to. And both of these use speech to text. There's a thing called Microsoft Immersive Reader, a fantastic program. There are free versions as well as very cheap programs for school classrooms. It's a fantastic product that takes words apart to be able to make them easier to read, doing them by syllable type, so it would follow the instruction the student has had. It would highlight the text the student is reading. Phenomenal stuff that's happening. That's Microsoft Immersive Reader, highlights all of the nouns, highlights all of the verbs, to be able to see that in a sentence. It's great stuff. Prismo Go is an app that you can download onto your smartphone or device. It takes a picture of a text and then reads it back to you, which is fantastic. It's a great one. There are many out there, but this is a good one. Learning Ally is a program that's actually put together with federal funding. Our tax dollars helped pay for it. It's all of, I can't tell you how many titles of books, textbooks that are audio with highlighted text. And students who have dyslexia can have access to Learning Ally and should have access, and it can follow them into college. There's a thing called SnapType. There are many others now too, but if you have dyslexia and dysgraphia, you can take a picture of a homework sheet and then be able to type in answers and responses so that the student doesn't have to agonize over trying to spell and not be able to read it with the homework. So there are a lot of technology. There's just a few. There's loads of technology. Decoding Dyslexia Utah has on their Facebook page a link to some webcasts or webinars about just technology for folks who have dyslexia. So like I said, it's a whole thing on its own, but should be in classrooms and is available. There's no reason why it can't be. You write these into 504s. If there's any pushback by any of the teachers about, oh, they can't have this or that, then we write it into the 504 to make sure students have access to what they need, again, to function in class. So now I'm just going to quickly go over the instructional piece. So what should we be teaching these students? The science of reading. And you've heard me talk about this is the knowledge piece. It's not a destination. It's not a conference. It's not even a particular book. It's not a state of being. The science of reading is ongoing research. It's constantly changing. We're adding to it into the science of how we learn to read. That's what it is. So what's this SOR? I've seen it broken down to SOR. What is that? It's the ongoing research. It involves rigorous, peer evaluated and controlled research that leads to recommendations for teaching reading. Unfortunately, most of the science of reading is never taught to pre-service teachers in the schools of education. That's across the country. I had a fantastic program, never heard the word dyslexia. It's not okay. Number one reason someone's going to struggle. This disconnect has led to a reading crisis in the United States. So students with dyslexia are not the only ones who struggle, as we've said before. And Dr. Louisa Moats, a reading research and educator, says only 40% of students will exit the school system with basic reading skills. And that's not okay. So the majority are still struggling. So this is what we know from the science of reading. And the reason I'm giving you this picture, it's in the Dyslexia Handbook. And if you don't see or hear this being taught or talked about at your school with your teachers, then you have a problem. And we need to hear and see these things. It's called the simple view of reading. That's one piece of the science of reading. So out of all this research and study and understanding, what are some of the things, foundational things we understand about reading? Here's one, the simple view. One, and this is it's the simple view. The D over here is word recognition. It's being able to recognize the words. That's decoding. That's what the D means. Times C, which is oral comprehension, language comprehension. So those two times each other equal reading comprehension. Now notice it's multiplication times. So if I have a 0 on either side of that, I'm not able to decode. I don't have good word recognition, or I have a 0 on oral language and comprehension. Then my end result in reading comprehension is a 0. So we need both. That's the big takeaway. Vocabulary is a part of that oral language comprehension. So I need both sides of this in order to equal a sum, that I get something out of it, reading comprehension. I can't have one or the other. I need it all. And obviously our folks with dyslexia, we're looking more at the decoding side of it, the word recognition. But if I hang out with really poor decoding long enough and I'm deprived long enough, it starts to impact my other side, right? Even though I may have great oral language and comprehension, you give anything to me orally, I'm able to respond terrific. But eventually, if I'm not able to really get into the material and access, I may see a deficit on the other side as well over time. So this is the simple view is a great way of being able to talk about the components of reading. You should be able to hear and see this in classrooms. This next one is a key component of what we've learned about the science from the science of reading. It's called Scarboroughs reading rope. So this should be very familiar. This should not be something new. This is the many strands that are woven into skilled reading. So what we've done is taken the simple view and made it a little more complicated, turned it into a rope now instead of a times multiplication problem. So here we're looking at all the strands that go into a really strong, thick rope. And we know that large, thick rope is made up of many small strands. Same with reading. It's got a lot of pieces to it. So let's understand those two major pieces are the pieces that came into our multiplication problem. We had word recognition, the decoding. On the top, we have the language comprehension. But look at all the pieces that are listed underneath each of those. So our simple view didn't have them broken out for us. And here we're looking at the decoding part, the word recognition. Again, our folks with dyslexia, we really need to get in and do some good work, foundational work. That phonological awareness, being able to hear, manipulate, and understand those sounds. The decoding is the alphabetic principle, putting the two together, the sound with the symbol, and rapidly and automatically being able to access that relationship between the sound and the symbol. That gives me my spelling sound correspondences, being able to do that. That's all in this lower rope strand. Notice that the arrow moving in towards the larger piece of rope, these become increasingly automatic. So I can't stay at the stage where I really got to think about it. Oh, that's difficult, but I can get the answer eventually. That is not mine. I don't have it. That's not automaticity. So we're moving, it becomes increasingly automatic as I really do get these skills. Notice the top there with language comprehension. It's all the background knowledge. It's the vocabulary. It's the language structures, the syntax, the semantics. the verbal reasoning, it's the inferences, the metaphor, the literacy knowledge of print concepts and genres. All of that comes at the top of language comprehension. And that becomes increasingly strategic. So the bottom is increasingly automatic, quickly and automatically being able to put the sounds and the symbols together, those spellings, because I'm able to map that. But at the top, that's becoming increasingly strategic. My ability to be able to get into a text, understand the vocabulary terminology that may not be familiar to me and how to get to an understanding of that. That's strategic. Until that large rope, as we've woven these together and everything is good, you have skilled reading. And that's fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. And that's everything. That's when you've got it all coming together and you have the skills to be able to transfer that to going to college, studying, being able to go to any job that requires reading and writing. So the main challenges for weak readers, just to reiterate, and here's a fantastic book that I always point out. This is by Dr. David Kilpatrick. In 2015, he released a book. He did some fantastic work in pulling the research together. This is not what he thinks. This is not anything that he's done himself. He just did all the hard work of researching and bringing all the 30 plus years of reading research and condensing it into this book for folks. And so it was a real game changer in 2015 to have a lot of this condensed into one place in this book, Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties. And Dr. Kilpatrick is very approachable. He's done so much terrific work. If a parent, educator, anybody reaches out and emails him, he tries very hard to get back and answer your questions. So he's very much available. But here are the main challenges for weak readers. Number one, students need to develop good phonic decoding skills. Poor phonic decoding is a common characteristic of weak readers. It's number one. Number two, weak readers need to develop the capacity to easily remember the words they read. Weak readers have limited sight vocabularies because when they encounter new words, they do not remember them because there was no way to map it and hang on to it. Weak readers require dozens of exposure to words before they are permanently stored. It's going to take me so much longer. I have to see it so many more times. Number three, once the capacity to efficiently store new words is developed, students require a great deal of reading practice. Only words that have been encountered can be added to one's sight vocabulary. Wide exposure to words is necessary to build that sight vocabulary. However, reading practice alone is not an effective way to improve reading skills if the student is unable to phonetically decode unfamiliar words or to remember the words being read. So there's a lot of work to be done, and those are the main challenges for our struggling readers, those who are working on it. So the research components of a successful reading program, they aggressively addressed and corrected the student's phonological awareness difficulties. I'm teaching the sounds, aggressively addressing that and getting the student to advance phonological or phonemic awareness, so that they can reach it automatically, have access. They provided phonic decoding instruction and or reinforcement. They provided students with ample opportunities to apply these developing skills to reading connected text. Plenty of opportunity in text. That's called the transfer. Once I've been taught, what's the transfer? So those three main components to a really good reading program. And is that what my student who is struggling has exposure to? Are they receiving this? So here I'm just going to quickly list the resources. And again, I'll share this PowerPoint with you. These are some of the, I have so many, I couldn't, but these are really some of the best that are listed here because I couldn't list everything. The last one, the Handbook of Orthography and Literacy, no one's going to purchase it. It's huge, it's big. Only if you love the field, you're going to get into it. But it gives you an appreciation just looking at it of how much research we have done, how much knowledge we do have. And that is a great compilation to just sit back and go, we do know a lot. We do know a lot about the science of reading. And here's some resources that are online, some websites that I think are fantastic. Those will be listed there for folks to be able to get free resources. A lot of these have a lot of free things that are very good. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, as I said, is one with Dr. Sally Shaywitz, who was involved with that one. So I think, Leslie, if you are still with us, hanging out, if we have questions. So I told Leslie I would round this up in about an hour, and I think I've stayed true to my word.
You have.
So, yeah, good. So that we could take some questions.
Yeah, so this meeting is scheduled until about 8 o'clock. You know, if people want to stay on, and if Donnell is okay with that, we may be able to go a few minutes past that. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Throughout the presentation, there has been a few questions. And so I'll get started with those. Donnell, can a TBI lead to dyslexia?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so developmental dyslexia, no. So I'll just tell you, because that's the developmental, right? You're born with, that's developmental dyslexia. But can a traumatic brain injury lead someone to have characteristics of when they're struggling with? Yeah, I've seen things like that, but it's not dyslexia. It's because of the brain injury. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't really good things we can do with a structured literacy program to help that student be able to overcome. But again, it's understanding the profile of the student. So I wouldn't just, oh yeah, we'll just do what we do for kids who have dyslexia. I would want to see some testing done on the student so that we can look at some of those, tests and the results so that I'm doing the right thing that's appropriate for the student. Yeah, that's a good question. Excellent question.
Can vision therapy help with dyslexia?
Okay, so this is controversial. Vision therapy is so controversial. If you want to see people just getting in an uproar over stuff, it's vision therapy and dyslexia. Okay, so just to give a little groundwork to this, because I'm not one of those who runs out of the room or wants to jump up and say, oh, I'm open to all kinds of things because I work with a lot of students, so I see a lot of things. Vision therapy, no. So this is brain based. And so what we're talking about here, it's phonemic awareness, it's rapid automatized naming. There are foundational skills that need to be taught in order for a student to read who has dyslexia and to read well, right? Because remember, they can read. It's just what's the pathway that we're using? What are the skills that they have? Have we not built up the skills that they need? They're the foundational skills of reading, right? Now, that isn't to say that maybe somebody has some visual difficulties. So whenever I have a student that comes to me and there seems to be, when I see that student working with any letters or whatever, and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe we ought to have an eye exam too. You never want to ignore it because reading is visual, right? I'm looking at the page using my eyes. It's a visual activity. So I want to make sure that they've had a good vision exam, right? And to make sure that we've looked at all of that. Now, I know some parents are just really determined that, oh, there's a visual piece. But I really want to make sure that we lean into structured literacy. We've taught the foundational skills because something interesting does happen for a lot of students. They were being very inefficient visually because they were hopping all over the page trying to find something that looked familiar, some landmark, some way to get through the read. And when you start to teach and the student is receiving appropriate instruction, you see a lot of that settle down because the student is now able to, okay, I can orient myself. I now know what I'm looking, I know how to do this. So anyway, it can be very complicated in many ways, but it's an excellent question because boy, does it get tossed around. But I always lean back to make sure you're getting tutored with a good structured literacy program and you're getting the instruction that the student needs in reading, good reading instruction first and foremost. Don't ignore having an eye exam. That would be my advice for it. It's a great question.
Next question, do you recommend getting the diagnosis outside of the school for future services?
Oh, this is another really great question. These are excellent questions. Excellent. And depending on where I am and who I'm with, I give a little different answer. Of course, the school system says, oh, if we can do all and we're going to provide. And sometimes that's the truth. Sometimes you have some folks who've had some very good training. It all depends on who's doing the testing, who's interpreting the testing, who's providing the intervention. And I think that's critical. And if they have a good background, solid background, and it's research-based, and they have training, then I feel comfortable. Now, I'm leaning more into a diagnosis, and that has to be done outside of the school system for now. As I say, I think we've had some districts toying with the idea, but again, it's a licensing thing as well, in addition to training. And I've only done that particularly as my student has gotten older. I'm talking about personally here for my own student. We had a special education classification and we knew it was dyslexia. That was sufficient for some things. As we got older and there were more difficulties in different things, we needed more information. The diagnosis was the route that we took. I'm leaning more into Dr. Sally Shaywitz said, we have to really understand that student and their particular challenges and difficulties. And so if you're not getting enough information to feel like you as a parent understand your student and they understand themselves as they grow because they need to know this information, and it's not enough for the educator, then I'm leaning towards a diagnosis to help. Now, this is all very costly. So parents will sometimes say, should I have the diagnosis or should I have the intervention? And I always say, if we've got enough understanding to know that we're looking at dyslexia, we're always going to lean into intervention. I mean, let's get them the help right away. But eventually we are going to need to know information about that particular student and their challenges and difficulties as well as their strengths, right? Boy, these are good questions. So good.
So you had mentioned on one of your slides, LBLD. Can you explain what that is?
Oh, learning behavior. Yeah, so that was just, yeah, on the slide with difficulties. Yeah.
Okay, so it's learning
Yeah.
behavior. Okay. All right. Do you have any, so we have one parent says, I have tried for years to get testing inside the Salt Lake School District, and we still have not been able to have her tested. I'm interested in outside of the school testing resources. Does Decoding Dyslexia on their website, do they have testing?
They do have a list. Yes, they do have a list. It's a good list. But I would also say if you, and I don't, of course, I'm not understanding everything that has gone on, but if you say you've been trying for years to get testing and haven't, that doesn't sound okay to me. So if there's a challenge and there's been an issue with testing and you feel like, because that shouldn't happen. You should understand what went on, and it shouldn't ever be, well, they just refused to do anything. That should never be the answer. So I've presented enough with the USBE, called the Utah State Board of Education and talked to someone in the special education department and discuss what went on, so you have a good understanding of what occurred with the school. The USB wants that to happen because they don't want parents not knowing and having a good communication. Sometimes just a matter of communicating well between each other. But they would want to know about that situation. So I wouldn't just walk away from that situation. They would want to know and be able to walk through that with you to have an understanding of what went on. Because it's always, we're trying to meet the needs of students. And I know that that wouldn't be okay with them to have a parent saying, hey, look, they just refuse to do anything. And so I'd want you to do that just to make sure we've covered all bases. Because the other thing is you're going to go back to that school with your student, with or without, if you choose to go out and get a diagnosis, you're still coming back to that place of learning. And so we do need everybody to be communicating and understanding how we're going to help this student, right? And if you choose to go outside and get a diagnosis, as Leslie said, the Decoding Dyslexia Utah website has a good list of individuals who do a nice job giving a diagnosis. I know that Dr. Martinelli down at Utah Valley University is one that I know personally, and he does a really good job, particularly with one that's academic based, being able to speak to teachers. So that's kind of nice.
So can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
And if they say that the district will not test for dyslexia, that's just something they don't test for. I've been looking into private organizations that test for it, but they also charge you for like a $3,000 to $5,000 program. And so to me, in some ways, it's like a conflict of interest because, what if they just want my money? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
how do I know I'm getting an unbiased report?
Right. So the information, we don't test for dyslexia. Okay. What we're doing is we're kind of mincing words here. Yes, the district doesn't test for dyslexia, meaning they're not going to give you a specific test for dyslexia. However, if you have a student who is struggling, you've reached out and said, my student is struggling, they have to identify. That's called child find. They have to do something.
Okay.
And that's in writing. And you've said, my student is struggling and I've asked for help. They have to evaluate that student. Now, what they choose to do for the evaluation, you should be able to walk through that. Are they doing a dyslexia test? No, because there isn't a dyslexia test. We do a lot of different testing to see the characteristics and things that are occurring with that student. So again, this communication challenge, I would reach out to the Utah State Board of Education, somebody who works in special education, and talk to them on the phone about the wording that's been used. And it's a communication challenge because that does need to be worked out. No, we don't test for dyslexia and there's no dyslexia test, but we do evaluate students who are struggling. Yes, we do. So that needs to be done.
But will that test be specific to what they're really struggling with if it's dyslexia? Does that make sense? Because I want to know more specifics of what I should be working on with my child when it comes to dyslexia.
No, absolutely. The evaluation should. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But again, it sounds to me, I'm going to tell you just right off, it sounds to me like you do need to involve the Utah State Board of Education to help you walk through this with the district so that everybody's on the same page. And that's what they're there for. They're there to help you. So I would definitely reach out.
Thank you.
This is something they would love to help you with. Yeah.
And Chelsea too, you're able to give the Utah Parent Center a call too, and we can, kind of walk with you through that process as well. and maybe help, explain some things and just give you some more information as well on that process. So
Thank you so much.
You
yeah.
bet.
So our next question, so you had listed, Donnell, some accommodations, and I have a parent wanting to know if those are actually modifications, maybe in the curriculum, not necessarily all accommodations.
So the one that's considered a modification would be shortening down an assignment, right? That's a modification, but modifications are not audio. If I'm getting audio of the very same text everybody has, that's no modification. That's an accommodation. I'm getting the very same text as everybody else. I'm getting it auditory, right? Because that's what I can do. So yes, the one that is most definitely making a shorter assignment. That's a modification of the assignment, right? If everybody's being asked to write this page, I'm being asked to write a paragraph. And watch out for modifications versus accommodations. Accommodations are just things that allow me to do the same work as everybody else, right? So again, if I get the test read to me, that's not a modification. It's the same test everybody's having. It's being given to me in the way that I currently have the skill for, but it's the very same material. Then I'm going to give an answer that's going to have to be the correct answer that everybody else is given to get it correct. That's no modification. That's an accommodation. Now, if somebody shortens that test, changes the questions to something that are lower than my grade level, that's a modification. Yeah, and let's keep an eye out for those, because the problem with modifying things too much is then my student graduates and they don't have the skills for going on to college because they only ever had to write a paragraph or something, right? So that's a very good distinction. Thank you for pointing it out. Yes, keep an eye out for what is an accommodation, which just allows me to reach the same material that everybody else is doing. And I'm required to give the same response as everybody else that's my age and at the same grade level. But a modification is I'm doing less, or maybe we're asking easier questions. Those are modifications, and keep an eye out for those. Yeah.
So we had a question from Soraya, and she was wondering, can homeschoolers access services or help? And Soraya, homeschoolers are entitled to Child Find as well. So you're able to give the center a call if you'd like, and we can kind of help you through that process. But Donnell, did you have any other comments on that?
No, just adding that, like you've said, Leslie, they are. Resources are available for them too.
Okay. So we had a question. This is very helpful for classrooms and teachers, but educators are not allowed to diagnose. Where would parents go for that type? What type of doctor?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the discussion, so yeah, teachers are not allowed to diagnose. They're not licensed, trained to do that in the state of Utah, because other states are different, right? This is not nationwide all the same too. That's a good thing to remember. When I move, it may be different outside of the state. So that's something to keep in mind. Or I want to share information with my friends in California. It may be different on some of these key points. So in the state of Utah so far, it's anyone who's licensed, trained and licensed to give a diagnosis of dyslexia. So far, those are neuropsychs and psychologists. I have heard, but I haven't seen myself, that there are some school psychologists who have been trained and licensed, but I haven't met one yet. I've just heard rumor, but I don't know.
As far as autistic children, is it more common for them to have dyslexia? Are they related?
Okay, so not any more common, and I'm glad somebody asked this question. No, so far, statistically, and there's not a ton of research too. I'd love to see more, because when you have just a few, you wonder. But so far, no more prone to having dyslexia, developmental dyslexia, than any other population. But can it be more challenging to help remediate because of some of the challenges and difficulties that come with autism? Yes. And oftentimes it gets overlooked or ignored because of the autism. And many people say, oh, it's just because they have autism, and they haven't really done a deep dive. So I happen to work at a charter school for students who have autism. It's one of the only kind across the country and in the state of Utah. And I worked with the middle and high school students, and I had plenty of high school students that I found, identified through Child Find, identified 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade that had dyslexia and autism, and their dyslexia had never been addressed. And they had stacks of information that had been gathered over them over the years, and none of it addressed this reading difficulty and the struggle. There's a reading disability, and it had been overlooked. So it just breaks my heart, because they were never getting the help that they needed. And then, of course, once structured literacy on board, doing the correct instruction, we saw some real gains. And So and it's not too late. That's the other piece is, even though they were high school, it wasn't too late to identify, evaluate, and make sure we had appropriate instruction.
What tips would you give parents to be able to start advocating for programs within their schools for resources and supports for dyslexia?
Yeah. Oh gosh, such a great question. So this legislative session coming up, so we're going to be coming here into our 2022. It's not too early to be thinking about that. So already we have legislators who are divvying up the things they're going to be, focusing on coming into the session. And that's really where all the action happens. So Decoding Dyslexia Utah does a lot of that advocacy. So their Facebook page, be sure to get on there and see if you can't join in some of the discussion for this legislative session, because that's where the money is divvied up. That's where a lot of the instructional practices are talked about too. What's required, what's not required. And so they've done some great work, DD Utah has, in laying a foundation of helping to get better training for teachers. And the Utah State Board of Education is on board. They want to see us improve. They're just as desperate to have some of this happen as well. So what we're leaning into so far, what we've looked at is getting basic training K through 3 for all teachers in the basics of reading and some of the science of reading. And that's in that LETTERS program by Dr. Louisa Moats. So far, the state of Utah, it looks like with COVID interrupting everything, we're finally going to be able to see that branch out across the state. We need to see every educator getting that training. Now, the trouble is we have the training about the basic science of reading, but again, we're missing the other vital, crucial piece, giving the materials for when the teacher hits the classroom after the training. So now what do I teach with? LETTERS doesn't give them that. And I've talked about this vocally. I've been one of the few to say, but okay, that's half of it, but where's the other half? Because once the teacher hits the classroom, where are the materials that are based on what they've just learned that they don't have to go out and collect or do themselves or try to fill in for themselves? And we're still missing that component. So some really good programs. I mean, you can look up structured literacy on the International Dyslexia Association website. They have some that they will list for you, but you're looking for all of the components of structured literacy: explicit, systematic. They teach the foundational skills and then they build on those skills. You teach all of the things that are stable and standard in English before you teach any of the exceptions to any rule. That you should see that in a program. There's plenty of opportunity for taking phonemic awareness activities, the sounds, and attaching it to the letters or the grapheme. That's phonics when you put the two together. And then plenty of opportunity to work with that, the transfer. What am I being asked to do for demonstrating my ability to encode? And then if I make a mistake, how are you intervening on that? Are you using the sounds to get to that? So those are the components, understanding the components. And again, on the IDA website, they can tell you the components of what it should look like.
Okay. You had mentioned before in your slides that dyslexia may also be diagnosed with other disabilities.
Co-occur, yes.
Yeah. And so how is that something that is just individual? Would the parent need to, observe what their child is doing or what they're not doing, and then be able to relate that to a professional? So
yeah. So all of this depends on the professional so much. If they have a lot of experience with students who have dyslexia, then they're already probably looking at dyslexia and other, right? Co-attending, comorbid, and they'll do other tests as they should, coexisting. And so you want to have that conversation before you have an evaluation or test. Is it helpful if a parent mentions, yes, we feel there's dyslexia, there's a family history. That's number one, family history, because that is a key giveaway. Otherwise, bright students struggling with, yes, we're fitting the definition. But then we've also noticed that there's some attention stuff that may be more, and you can give a heads up to the individual who's going to be doing the evaluation, the professional. And they should be doing that too when they sit down with the parent who comes. You should be getting a thorough question and answer, an opportunity to talk about what you're seeing or what's happening. That's all a part of a really good evaluation, right?
So if a child already has a developmental delay, but is excited to read and may have dyslexia, they have a family history of dyslexia, do you have any ideas for programs that might get them started?
Yeah, so in developmental delay, here's something I want to point out too, because there's this misconception about reading that needs to be clear. IQ and reading are not related. Okay, so let's just get that straight. I can have a very high IQ, and many of my students top the chart on their IQ, very high IQ. They're struggling with reading because they have a reading disability. It's a neurocognitive difference, okay? And then I also likewise have had many students who have what was considered a low IQ, who are great little readers. They're great little readers. Now, that low IQ is eventually going to impact perhaps comprehension, nuance, those sorts of things eventually. But getting the basics of how to read, no, because they don't have a reading disability. So I've seen really atrocious things happen when we take IQ and apply it to reading. We shouldn't be doing that. And then we do terrible things. So I saw the student with the lower IQ being totally neglected. Oh, he's never going to learn to read very well. His IQ is too low. I said, does he have a reading disability? I don't. Yeah, no. So he should be receiving very good structured literacy instruction, and then took off. Fantastic little reader. So again, make sure we're not leaning too hard into the IQ. With that being said, what are some good things I can do to support perhaps a student with a developmental delay who does still have an enjoyment for reading and want to read? Good structured literacy. So that same program that works really well for someone with dyslexia would be great instruction for someone who has developmental delay, but otherwise seems to really enjoy and appreciate reading. So explicit, systematic instruction that goes through starting with the basic foundational skills and moves through laying on those. Make sure that the spelling piece, the encoding piece, is taught well, because that's another thing I see fall down for folks who don't have dyslexia, but maybe had some other challenges that made understanding the more nuanced way of how we teach spelling too difficult to really get it down. And that's an area where that could really improve for that student. Likewise, help with the reading as well. Yeah.
Do you have any things that parents should be looking for in hiring an outside tutor?
Yes. So if you're going to have a tutor, and the tutor is for somebody who has dyslexia, they have to have been trained in an Orton-Gillingham based program for someone who has dyslexia. Because so far the OG really does talk specifically about students who have dyslexia. And I would trust that. Again, the Decoding Dyslexia Utah website has some tutors who are trained. And so I would be leaning into that. Wilson is a program for students who have dyslexia. That was specifically, Barbara Wilson made that program for students who have dyslexia. So that would be one I would trust. Wilson, OG, Orton, Gillingham. Doctors Orton and Gillingham, dyslexia is what they were addressing. So I would trust that. Yeah.
Perfect. So if there were heavy interventions done in the beginning and now the child is resistant to reading, do you have any tips or tricks?
I know. This is my own personal story, because I had loads of intervention with my son, and I would love to have seen him get to the point where he just enjoyed it. He never has. I know. So here's what I do. Here's what I recommend. And they're older. So I'm talking now, we're moving into late years of elementary school to middle school to high school. Then what I start to do with the material that's put in front of the student, I'm looking at anything and everything that is of interest to that student. And so I'm audio for some things. Hey, let's listen to that. And I'm looking for interesting audio. At Halloween time for middle school and high school students, we would do Dracula, the story, or not Dracula, but Frankenstein. So great, and online, there's some great free versions of the audio. Frankenstein, there's some great books that kind of give you the history of the story of Frankenstein, and it's a really great story. Try to think of things that'll be very interesting for them, and they can approach it in the way that is most easy and accessible to them. And I start leaning into that. Then I might put pieces of literature in front of them that might be, if it's not some of our graphic novels that are fantastic on subjects that are very interesting, then it might be a short piece on career I think they might find interesting. I have a young student who fits that middle school section right now, moving into high school, and I'm always looking for material that I think he'll find interesting. And he's had years of remediation. And it's just trying to find something in a way that will be enjoyable for him. And it doesn't have to be what I think, what a teacher thinks. That's always been imposed on him. And I'm just trying to find ways to let him kind of lead me while still providing those materials. And so I'm always searching. I mean, I got a book, one of the other books we did the other year ago was one that was male authors writing for male students that might be interested. I was looking at really specific things. I got another one that was for, students who were Latina that wrote poetry in an inner city school. And I used that with some students that had an interest. So I'm just really trying to find things, and there's plenty out there. It takes a little more work, if you will, but even if you find one thing and you see them light up for a couple of reads, you're thrilled, right? That's the challenge is that we're getting too late to our students. I got to my son too late. I had all this information, I still got too late. The earlier we get in there, the better chance we have of not having that lag or delay that then makes reading become work, and no one enjoys work, right? And then they never quite see it the same way again. If the things we loved were work, we probably wouldn't love them as much as we do, right? Yeah.
So it is 5 to 8, and I'm going to be launching a poll. Donnell, sit tight for just a minute if you can. If you like the content that you've seen tonight, please go ahead, and even if you haven't, we love your feedback. And I'm sure Donnell's done a wonderful job, and we are so grateful for her knowledge tonight. So go ahead, I'm going to launch this poll. Please tell us what you thought, and let's see. I'm not going to be able to launch the poll. Amy Wall, can you launch the poll? See if you can.
I will try.
Thank you. It's not letting me.
That's very-
Donnell, do you have a few more minutes to stick around? We've got a couple more questions.
I
Perfect.
betcha.
You guys, we have so many questions, and we're not going to have time to get to them all, but please give Utah Parent Center a call. Some of the questions that you have are more procedural. You may have issues with your school, or being, having requests and not have them followed through. Please give the center a call. We can definitely direct you and help you learn more about how to advocate for your child and those procedural safeguards that you.
And Leslie, I'm going to say I use the Utah Parent Center many times, and I am your #1 advocate and fan. I had some fantastic individuals who came to IEP meetings early in the day with me. So yes, you guys, fantastic resource.
Thank you, Donnell. Thanks. Okay, so let's go ahead with a few more questions. Let's see. I have a comment. Currently, due to regulations from 2019, special education evaluations primarily gather responses to intervention data and information instead of testing. Districts are no longer able to use discrepancy calculations obtained from standardized testing alone to determine eligibility.
Strengths and weaknesses is what we're leaning towards, yeah.
So they're trying to identify strengths and weaknesses?
Because our students with dyslexia were never making it with a discrepancy model, yeah.
Okay. Is there a way to train parents to help their children become better readers?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I wish every parent could receive the kind of training that tutors do, because you're with your student all the time, right? You are their #1 advocate. You're going to be with them their lifetime, and so we should have more parent trainings to learn the foundational skills. So there's a couple of things. One is Susan Barton is a system that is meant to do out of the box for students who have dyslexia. And I've used the Barton method. I've been trained in a lot of the pieces. I've attended her training. She's fantastic. And it literally is tutoring in a box. And on Decoding Dyslexia Utah, they have a forum where parents trade boxes. So once you're done with a box, you could use another box and not buy it. So you could trade boxes with somebody. That's a nice thing because they can be very expensive. That's one that, Leslie, you could literally get the box and start doing something to help your student. It's scripted. You read the script just like it is. So that's one. Another one is, I know on the Reading Horizons website, so Reading Horizons is a local company that does structured literacy. There is and it should be on the homepage, there's a link to an online training that used to be free and should still be free, where you could learn the foundations of the method. That's structured literacy. So you got to see how you take apart words and how you start with the foundational skills and kind of get a feel for it. And that used to be free on there. And it's a nice little training that you just do online software. I'm trying to think of free resources because many of them can be very, very expensive. They're great training, but it's a lot of money to be trained. But those are free.
Perfect. What if a child is nonverbal? How can you test for dyslexia?
Yeah, and I'm assuming, so I make an assumption here about nonverbal. Is that related to autism? And so, I would think that #1, you're going to need to have somebody who understands why the student is nonverbal, and then what the form of communication is, a good understanding with the form of communication, so that you can conduct some of those basic assessments that will need to be done to see if there is dyslexia. Yeah, that could be complicated. So you'll need the right people on board.
What are good materials or curriculum for teachers?
Yeah, so this is a long, we could have a conversation about that for days, right? On the right curriculum. But going back to structured literacy. So Dr. Louisa Moats also came up with a fantastic, well, with IDA, it's not her alone. She said, don't quote me as that being mine alone, but she was with a group of reading researchers who came up with, let's put under one umbrella, what should be in a very good reading program from the science of reading that isn't a stamped name of Wilson or another program, Spire or something else. But what are the components that need to be in a good reading program that has the science of reading? And it's called structured literacy. The full definition is on the website for the International Dyslexia Association. You can type in structured literacy to see what it says, but it's that I was talking about with the explicit, systematic, starting with the foundational skills and building. We teach everything to mastery. We teach skills before we teach exceptions. So you learn a rule, you learn the skill before you teach any of the exceptions. That's a must to see in the program as well. Plenty of opportunity for transfer, being able to take the skill that I've been taught and use it. That is structured literacy, what any good program should have.
Perfect. We do have one participant that said they loved everything and they are dyslexic. So
great. Yes, you are our folks. We're here for you.
To go along with that, there is one that asked, are there any resources for an adult who just figured out he probably has dyslexia tonight?
I know. You're my people. So that's, Leslie, I've taught all the grades. I've been in all those grade levels, working in classrooms. And where I have landed by choice is in the adult arena because there's no one. I mean, I was unable to find hardly any resources that are appropriate for adults who have dyslexia. Again, appropriate meaning you're treated as the adult that you are, who has dyslexia that was never addressed correctly and appropriately. And you need to be trained well in order to do that appropriately. So I would be more than happy to consult with this individual. My email is on the PowerPoint. So feel free to reach out and email me, and I will be more than happy to help you find resources. Do that directly.
Thank you, Donnell.
Yeah.
We will be sending this out shortly. So there's a lot of information on there. So you're able to refer to those slides. What if, can a child be successful in a dual immersion program with dyslexia?
Yeah, so I get this question from time to time, and yes, but again, how severe is the dyslexia, right? So you have to have an understanding of how severe is the dyslexia. Is it double deficit? Do I have phonemic awareness and rapid automatized naming happening? Is it just phonemic awareness? So a good understanding of the student, right? And the strengths as well as weaknesses. If the student has a real desire, that's key too. They don't mind and they enjoy. But no, just because you have dyslexia does not preclude you from learning another language. Absolutely not. But having those understandings really does help, being able to understand the foundation of the dyslexia and then having really good instruction. So I teach a lot of students who are English as another language for them. And I have to have a really good understanding of their primary language. And I take a lot of that information in order to inform the other language, English, which is what they're learning. And I'm using structured literacy. And what I find often happens is the really good structured literacy instruction they're receiving in English informs their primary language and fills in gaps they didn't have in their primary. They were like, oh, that makes sense now for my primary language. And I love to see that because that means I'm teaching appropriately and it's meeting their needs, right? So no, just because a student has dyslexia does not preclude them from dual language immersion, but having that understanding and teaching is key. Yeah.
We do have just a comment. So the UAT team, or Utah Assistive Technology Teams, is a great resource for students that are nonverbal or have other needs, right, including dyslexia. So each school district should have access to a team. And Julia put that in the chat, the UAT website. You're able to go to that website and find out more information. But what do you think about assistive technology, Donnell, and it's relating to dyslexia? Is that helpful?
Fantastic. So a lot of those resources that I listed, technology, instead, there's a whole webinar on the Decoding Dyslexia Utah website, because it's a whole thing in of itself. No, it's fantastic. And another piece that a lot of people don't realize oftentimes is that the folks at Google and Microsoft, a lot of those folks who work there have dyslexia. So this was something I've heard about, and over the years, I've even read articles about, but I actually talked to some of the folks at Microsoft who make this technology that, like immersive reader, they have dyslexia and they have kids who have dyslexia. So yes, I think the technologies are fantastic. As I said, I always make sure we have good instruction. We're doing remediation and instruction to get the skills. But at the same time, if I've been advanced and I haven't gotten the help that I need in order to be at grade level and do the work, I can do the work. It's just the medium in which I'm receiving and being able to give the information back, right? And so that's where assistive technology is fantastic at being able to help me bridge that gap while I'm getting the help with the skills, right? So there are two pieces here. One does not preclude the other. So I have all of my assistive technologies to help me to be able to meet the curriculum needs at the time and the demands, but I'm also getting correct instruction in order to have the skills that I need, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Donnell, I think we've had many comments how wonderful the information was, so we truly appreciate that. Also, we usually send out a poll. The poll, unfortunately, was not working tonight, but we will send that poll out to all of you who registered. So please get that and fill that out. It's for our benefit.
Leslie, it worked.
Yes. Oh, it worked.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
perfect. I
Don't worry.
didn't see it on my screen. So thank you, Amy.
Well, that's because you're a host, so you don't have to fill it out.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you then. I did have one other question I wanted to just came in. Are spelling and grammar tests okay? My kids fail them all the time.
No, they're not okay.
Okay.
I don't even need you to finish the question. They're not okay. Yeah, we shouldn't be doing them. So you can have an assessment or an informal, assessment. You should be doing that along the way in your teaching anyway, all through the week. We shouldn't be waiting for one day of the week to be doing that, and it should be built in. But that's a transfer. That's a transfer of, if I taught the skill well, if the students are able to, and we should be spelling by syllable. We should have learned all of the sounds that are going to be used for the graphemes for those particular words. So I shouldn't be asked to do anything that I don't have the skills to do. Memorizing spelling lists is not the science of reading. It has no research foundation whatsoever. So I repeat, no research backs up memorizing a list of random words. None. So those should have gone a long time ago. There is no support for them. And in the world of the science of reading that we know, there's no background for them. Now, do I have lists of words that I've been learning the skills for, and they're words that I have all the skills to be able to spell? Yes, I can do those. Absolutely. And it goes with the instruction that I've received. But I should have all the skills to be able to do that. I'm not memorizing anything, and we didn't even have time tonight to go into orthographic mapping, but that's really what we're doing with words. It's called orthographic mapping. We think we're memorizing, it's happening so quickly, but no, there's no research for that. And then grammar is linked to a whole lot of other skills. So again, it should be within a program where I have been taught and I know I have the skills for, and grammar should be woven in there as a skill set that I'm getting as I go, so that I have the ability to do it. Just getting marked down on it and memorizing things is not appropriate. So it's woven into the instruction. That's good structured literacy. Again, I'm leaning into the definition of structured literacy for that.
So how would a parent want to communicate that maybe my child needs to be tested differently?
Yes, so that's where the Utah Dyslexia Handbook is going to come in handy. So you want to make sure you direct the teacher and the school to the Utah Dyslexia Handbook, because in there it specifically states no spelling tests for students with dyslexia, but it's not appropriate for anyone in the class. The other piece you're going to lean into is the letters training that K through 3 is receiving right now in the state of Utah. Letters training. They talk specifically about spelling tests and how they're inappropriate and what we should be doing instead. So you have two foundational pieces that teachers are receiving, two foundational pieces of information: Utah Dyslexia Handbook and letters training for teachers. And those two back each other up.
So it sounds like maybe parents may need to help, move their teams along
Yeah,
this road as well, right? Communicating
Yes.
what they have found and talking about it as a team.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why, Leslie, all of these organizations that have put in information tonight, which I totally appreciate, are helpful because they work together to help schools too, right? Because they're in the thick of it and maybe the information hasn't trickled down. And so you reach out to the organization to provide the information for them, right? That's what we're doing. We're helping each other, right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Donnell, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. And again, if you have further questions or need help in communicating with your teams, your school teams, or information on services available for your student, please give the Utah Parent Center a call. We can consult with you. And Donnell, any last words?
Oh gosh, I think I've said them all for tonight, but what a pleasure for me to be able to have this forum. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's nice for me to be someone who works with a lot of these different organizations to see that there are a lot of people working very hard to make things better. And that's why reaching out is always good. So when you reach out to the USB and you let them know, I have this struggle or challenge, they can provide information because a lot of this is new, right? We haven't had some of this information and maybe it was siloed or someone didn't receive it. And so this is nice that we network and help each other out because we need to move forward. Like we said, there's no knowledge gap. It's an action gap. And action means all of us helping each other get those resources.
Perfect.
Yeah.